What's up everyone, Kaze no What If is here with What If a Soul Was Sent into Naruto verse. Before we start, if you like the video, like it, share with your friends, comment, and let's start the video. So, what did you find? Rei looked at the source of the voice, Konan. Konan laid naked on the bed. On her tummy was the small square paper with the seal that connected them together. Rei sat next to her body, studying the seal while touching Konan all over her body. On his hand was a seal that allowed him to inspect the soul of the person he touched. Of course, the soul was connected with the entirety of the body, so he had to, molest Konan. Other than that, one should not mess with the soul. Rei quipped, making Konan roll her eyes at him. I found out we are going to do it again. Rei exclaimed and took the small paper from her belly, putting it on the table near the sealing matrix he was working on. Konan sat down, looking at Rei to scribble down more seals. The complicated seals were no longer only words with a few numbers. She just wasn't able to put her head around them even though she learned English. Shaking her head, she dragged her body across the bed, putting her chin on Rei's shoulder as her arm snaked around his neck. Closing her eyes, she relished the closeness. Rei could feel Konan's breasts on his back and smiled. Through the years he got used to working on seals in this position. He kinda started to miss it when he was trying to think of a seal and Konan was not hanging on his shoulders. What exactly are you trying to do? Konan's quiet whisper entered Rei's ears. He hummed as his pen stopped momentarily. I am making a soul detection seal geared towards our souls. Rei could feel Konan tilting her head. It was more like she leaned it into himself, but the meaning got across. You know my theory that seals are capable of creating dimensions, right? Konan hummed in affirmative. A far-fetched theory, but Rei was very convincing. After all, these storage seals must find the space to store all these things somewhere. I want to create our own place. Only for us. Rei told her, making her heart flutter. For now, I am working on a mechanism to allow entry only to us. Rei. Konan opened her embers with a smile. I love you. Rei smiled and softly bopped her head with his. I love you, too. Rei and Konan entered a vast clearing. It took Rei 2 months to create the keys, but he finally managed it. Whoa. Konan spun, bewildered, taking a proper look around. You created this with seals. The clearing was huge. Enough to fit the entirety of Kirigakura with its training fields. But it ended with blackness. There was nothing following at the end. Just solid darkness. Even the sky was all black and Konan wasn't sure how she managed to see without the sun. Rei told her the sight is dependent on the rays from stars and sun. Yet here were none and she could see. Rei saw her looking at the sky with a confused expression and smiled. It's due to seals. There are light-absorbing and air-absorbing seals. They suck air and light from outside, trapping it here. It is then sent from the sky down, making you able to see. I am sure I could get a better design sometime later, but for now, it is enough. Konan nodded and approached Rei, kissing him. So, the ground is made with jutsu then? Yes. Rei softly laughed as he returned her kiss. It is Doton producing jutsu. It actually worked. And the grass was an experiment to see if the plants can grow here. Where are we? Konan asked curiously. I don't really know, actually. My theory is we are outside of the space. I think I may be able to define this little dimension to be outside of the time as well, but it will take years. Rei bitterly smiled. Konan just kissed the tip of his nose. We have all the time in the world, my genius. That we do. my love. Rei nodded and kissed her cheek as both felt the nature energy of their dimension increase by the second the more they were inside. It started to affect the grass near them, which was getting greener and greener. Rei got many ideas seeing it, but he shrugged them off. He had to fulfill his boyfriend's duties first. So, up for a picnic. He raised the basket he was holding, making Conan giggle and hug him. A month later, Rei and Conan stood in the middle of their dimension. They joined their hands. Ready, Conan. Ready, Rei. Both smiled as the chakra and nature energy surged from their bodies, affecting the surroundings. The ground soaked up every bit of it and the world stilled for a second. All was peaceful and quiet until the world trembled. The ground started sending pulses like a heartbeat, sending earthquakes that clashed with each other, making the entire dimension violently shudder. Only Rei and Conan, standing in the center, and the ground under them was completely still, not moving even an inch. The ground was twisting, raising, lowering, mixing. It took 20 minutes until Conan and Rei stopped supplying chakra for the jutsu that will change their dimension forevermore. The ground stilled, and then one last pulse could be felt like a shockwave under the earth's surface slightly raised the ground before it promptly fell back and started to lower itself, creating a perfectly flat surface. No longer was it a grassy plain. Instead, the grass completely disappeared as a hard brown ground replaced it. But not for long. The ground started cracking all around as if a bud of a new plant was about to rise. The only difference was that these cracks were a few meters large, cracking the ground in the entire dimension except a circle with a few meters radius around Rei and Conan. Both Rei and Conan knelt down and slammed both of their palms to the ground, sending a pulse through it, pushing air away from themselves, creating shock waves. Mokuton, ever-growing evergreen. Their voices reverberated through the entire dimension as vines as thick as buildings started to cover the ground, snaking their way, intertwining, smashing, and pushing each other. When the vines finally covered the entire dimension except for a circle of a few hundred meters around Rei and Conan, they stopped. Instead of ground, the dimension was full of massive vines. Then the vines started creaking as if in pain when massive trees thrice as thick as the vines started forcefully pushing their way through them from the ground, reaching the sky, almost touching the ceiling of the artificial dimension. Leaves started to slowly but at a visible rate grow from the branches, painting the dimension green. These trees were all special, all having the power to gather the natural energy and saturate the ground and the air with it. Rei and Conan could feel the nature energy being gathered from the space beyond their dimension. Space around. Space below. Or space above. It just all started to hurtle and oversaturate their dimension. The more nature energy the trees gathered, the faster their leaves grew until they started falling down, touching the ground, dissolving there, gifting the ground with energy. As the energy filled the ground, the earth surged according to the intent of Rei and Conan, covering the vines, swirling like a whirlpool with the center around the space with Rei and Conan. Mixing the nature energy as if it was in a pot of boiling water being mixed by a spoon. But slowly, the energy started snapping, transforming. And then, everything changed. The trees stopped sucking nature energy from the surrounding space and instead started to produce their own nature energy. Completely different nature energy. Nature energy. Tailored for Conan and Rei and their chakra, their souls. Both Rei and Conan powerlessly fell onto the ground, unable to move as they felt their chakra stores completely drained almost as much as they felt the immense drain in their mind. Their focus had told ya it would work. Rei dryly chuckled. You and your theories. Conan mumbled with a giggle. If there can be two different nature energies in two different worlds. REI started. Then we can create our own nature energy suited only for us. Conan finished. We did it, love. REI tenderly whispered, still in disbelief. We did it? We created a self-sustaining demon. That we did. Both fell asleep mid-sentence from the sheer exhaustion. REI sat on the lake in their training ground. The Mizu cage made sure to permanently book it for Conan and REI. REI knew it was yet another of his moves to show them that Kiri was cherishing them. Showing them they are deemed important to the village. And for that REI would help Kiri in need. But he won't do it until there will be a profit to be had for him. He was still a shinobi, and as a shinobi acting for the good of others was just not in the guidebook. REI's hands were on the surface of the water. He channeled Katon chakra into the center of the lake, deep under the surface, and kept trying to keep it there despite it being inside of its polar opposite, water. It was not easy, but he found out it was the best control exercise for Katon chakra. He neglected it for years as he was busy, but as Conan decided she would train Ringo, he finally found a peaceful time to practice it. He watched as Ringo swung her sword at Conan, only to be blocked by brown paper, signalizing it was hardened. REI sighed. Conan was even showing Ringo which papers were hardened, which had water, and which were sharpened by coloring them brown, blue, and green. Yet, Ringo somewhat managed to always evade futon papers only to hit doton ones, unable to bypass the second layer of Conan's protective paper barrier. He shook his head as he saw her charge again, her double swords coated in lightning. Ringo charged at Conan. She knew her speed was solid Jonin level after 2 years of training with REI. He taught her how to raise it with her Raiten chakra and put her through literal hell to raise her natural speed. With Raiten chakra, she was finally able to reach the threshold to Jonin speed. She parried a futon paper and jumped to the right to evade another. As she landed, she spun, making 2 futon papers bypass her by an inch while her swords deflected 2 other paper slices. Ringo was sure that if her swords didn't have concentrated Raiten chakra, Conan's papers would damage the expensive blade made out of chakra metal. As her spin ended, Ringo could see then more futon papers fly at her, and she crouched down, jumping over them, twisting her body mid-air while channeling her Raiten chakra into a jutsu. Raiten, depth charge. Her body was enveloped in very concentrated Raiten chakra, sending bolts of energy from her body to avert the futon paper slices away from her. It worked, and she landed on the ground, unharmed. Springing up, she again started running at Conan, who motionlessly stood in the same place for over 4 hours now, as Ringo tried to reach her. The game was simple. 3 areas. First futon, second doton, third suten. So far, Ringo reached only doton area before she was pushed back to the futon one and then had to disengage completely as she was getting winded. As she ran forward, Ringo was happy when she saw she crossed the edge of the futon area. From now on, she didn't have to worry about sharpened slices of paper. Only the doton hardened ones were in this area. It really hammered down the difference between her and Conan when she realized she was happy to face only one type of Conan's attack, and even then had a hard time to reach her. For Conan as a ranged fighter, that was a real show of strength. Ringo braced herself. She knew this area was designed to test her strength. Something she lacked. In the futon area, she could pass with speed alone. This one, however. Lightning was supposed to be strong against earth, but Ringo's blade coated in Raiten chakra parried the first doton paper, making Ringo's feet slid a foot on the grass until she managed to brace herself and put her weight behind her parry. She twisted her arm, sending the paper to the side. She took a stance, one arm outstretched forward, holding her sword across her body while the other was behind her, holding her second sword in a reverse grip. Tens of papers flew at her, and Ringo spun on her heel, forcing her right chakra to quicken her spinning rate. The coating on her swords was pulsing as she was molding right chakra for a jutsu, something she herself developed with the help of Rei sensei. Raiten, heavenly rotation. Her sensei told her the name was a slap to the Hyuga's face and she really liked it. Her spinning created a dome that spun at very high speed, vibrating and repulsed anything that came into contact with it. The papers were being flung backward as they impacted the dome, but Ringo wanted to puke blood from the sheer force employed in them. She felt as if she was being crushed by just blocking them. She deflected the last and her focus slipped, only for her eyes to widen. Another paper impacted her dissipating dome, flinging her body to the right side. She landed on her feet into a crouch, coughing slightly. That hurt. She grumbled as she started running towards impassive Conan again. Ringo breathed hard when she was forced to deflect multiple Doton papers at high speed while jumping from side to side as she tried to advance. Inch by inch. She was not about to give up. Her panting intensified, but she finally deflected everything close to her. She smirked right into Conan's face. Ha, did it, Hugh. Ringo was gulping air greedily. It was not over yet. She would reach the thayer. Her eyes only registered the minuscule upturn of the corner of Conan's lips when she felt as if truck kun, as Rei sensei tried to say, impacted her back. A cat? That's game over if I see one. Rei chuckled as he saw Ringo's body sail through the Doton area, passing Sutton area, and flying way past Conan's figure only to impact the ground, which sent Ringo's body into a forceful roll for tens of meters until it finally stopped. It was only her Raiten chakras still in her system that made it possible to leave only with a few nasty bruises after such a display of kinetic roller coaster. That Bakadeshi. She once again managed to piss Conan off with her cheek. Then again. Rei turned to the right where the real Conan was sitting not far from him, reading a book. Did you really have to put enough force to break 10 trees into that paper? Conan calmly raised her head and her ember eyes impassively stared at the sprawled form of twitching Ringo. Yes. Rei was mulling over a missing part in his Fuinjutsu when he heard the door to the room open. He raised his head and froze, his throat going dry, making him gulp. He just realized. Today, both him and Conan are 15. Conan walked inside, swaying her hips as her privates were covered in underwear made of paper. Her steps were purposeful, slow, focused to give him show and emphasize her curves. Conan wore her typical makeup as she stopped 3 meters in front of Rei and leaned forward, giving him a look at her cleavage, her hands behind her back. Rei could see her eyes sparkling, expecting his reaction as both stared at each other. Rei stared at her with his mouth open. Conan stared at him, her lips curling up. Paper seriously. Rei deadpanned, making her face fault. She sprang up to her feet. What? It appeared the most natural. Conan shouted while pouting sullenly. I am sure. Rei snorted, averting his gaze, trying to hide his snickers. Conan sat on the edge of the bed with a huff, crossing her arms. Rei chuckled and approached her. He put his knee between her legs and cupped her chin, dragging her face to meet his as he embraced her. Rei looked at the small woman in his arms. She was barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, and while he was not that tall either, her head was barely reaching his chin. He smiled and put his chin on the crown of her head, his hands on her hips. How are you feeling? He asked tenderly. I love you. She blurted out, somewhat helplessly, but then her body relaxed as she somehow found amusement in the situation and released a small giggle. And here we are. I wanted to seduce you, yet it is you who are doing the seducing. Well, at least you are cute. Rei told her, making her widen her eyes, and before she could give some cheeky reply, he claimed her crimson lips. Their lips separated as Rei pulled his head away from her. Annie. He gave her an eye smile, only to feel his long braid be grabbed by Conan and pull him towards her as she started trailing pecks on his lips while her hands snaked around his neck, pulling him closer to her. Conan jerked her body backward, making her back fall onto the bed while pulling Rei with her. Rei smiled at her as he stored his clothes into a storage seal on the bracelet around his wrist. Are you sure you want this now? He quietly asked Conan. He knew she was prone to be hasty when it came to these things. Be gentle, okay? She timidly nodded and spoke in a mouse-like voice. I wanted nothing else for years. Conan whispered with a longing, desire-filled voice. She started kissing the crook of Rei's neck, and her hands started slowly scratching his bare back. Rei was momentarily distracted until he felt her teeth nibble on his collarbone. He was now assured that Conan really wanted this and wasn't about to let her be in the lead. Rei pulled his body backward, into a sitting position while Conan's hands instantly tightened her hold around his neck, pulling her body upwards, trying to get into his lap. Rei held her around her waist with one hand, helping her body rise as his second hand made the girl yelp when it took a handful of her ass to help her up. Conan didn't hesitate and her legs ended locked behind his back. They made out until Conan decided she had enough as she felt Rei's stiff member pressing on her butt. She raised her body and lowered herself, stopping only when she felt the tip of his penis slightly spreading her slit. KO dash. Before Rei could continue, Conan pushed his entire length into herself, her embrace tightening as she felt the pain of losing her virginity. She took a deep breath and started moving up and down. She was kunoichi. Small sting like that won't stop her. Not when she waited years for this. Rei was bewildered. Conan just took his virginity so fast he didn't even manage to blink. He bit back a laugh and decided. If she wanted to play it this way, then sure. He will oblige. His left hand touched her lower back, pushing Raiten chakra into it, sending a jolt of pleasure through her spine, making Conan straighten up with a squeal. She glared at Rei for that and her hands grabbed Rei's hips, sending her Sutan chakra, making his body instantly relax. He didn't lose control, but with his body loosened like this, it was hard to move and Conan was in the charge. Conan pushed his upper body back, making it fall onto the bed as she straddled him, rocking her body back and forth while panting. Rei felt her wet and warm walls as her body begged for release. Releasing his own Sutan chakra into his system, he regained the control and quickened the pace, putting his hands on Conan's thighs, sending his lightning chakra to her nerve endings, up her thighs, making them all tingle with pleasure. He could see Conan's body stiffening, coiling, as instead of continuous panting she was now releasing sharp breaths. She was almost there. Rei continued. His chakra was climbing up her thigh through her nervous system, flaring every nerve ending it encountered, and when it finally reached her nether regions, the nerve endings in her pussy. Conan squealed in a high-pitched girlish tone as her slit started gushing out juices while Conan's body was continuously shuddering in delight. Rei felt himself being gripped in crushing fleshy walls, feeling Conan's warmth. He couldn't resist and released a hot moan as he climaxed inside of Conan. He felt Conan's body fall onto his, still shivering in ecstasy. They lay there for 5 minutes like that when Conan started moving again and Rei pulled her head up, kissing her. Their night only started. They had much much more chakra and energy to spare for this much awaited night? They were at it for 6 hours straight, until all lust was filtered out of their system by sheer tiredness and the wetness around them. The sheets were drenched in their mutual juices, mixing together. Conan looked at Ariai's head that rested on her chest. She was proud. She made her man exhaust himself so much, he was unable to move. It made her giggle as her fingers coursed through his hair. She loved his long hair as her fingers could swim in them, feeling the silkiness. At times, it made her jealous, but Ariai always made sure to compliment how he absolutely loved her neck-long hair. Conan was looking at Ariai's drooping eyes and sighed in absolute satisfaction as she could still feel his seeds deep inside of herself. It made her so glad that Ariai made that anti-pregnancy seal. She wouldn't want to lose this feeling due to caution. Ariai felt proud. No, really. How many men could say they went blow ahem, orgasm for orgasm with the girl of their dreams? His cheek was sinking in Conan's modest but very comfortable chest as he felt Conan's fingers massage his scalp. Conan hummed as she cared for him. He could feel how much of a warm goo her body became and was actually impressed she could move her hand through his hair. He could still feel on his belly how wet her crotch was and how her muscles were relaxed. He wondered if either of them would be able to move tomorrow as their muscles reached their limit in the third hour of their lovemaking due to the excessive use of fine controlled elemental chakra. They pushed through themselves. But, as with explosives, if it ain't working, you ain't using enough. Conan just pushed more Sutan chakra into Ariai's muscles, relaxing them to keep going in her desire-driven pursuit for his body, while Ariai pumped her nerves with his Raitan chakra as he didn't want her to stop looking at him with such a loving devotion in her eyes. They knew well this was not the smartest approach. When your muscles are about to give up, you probably should not force them to continue for hours. Ariai was sure their bodies gave out somewhere between the 5th and 6th hour and neither could move anymore. Conan's nervous system was screaming in pleasure at her to not put more Raitan chakra through it, and Ariai's muscles stopped working no matter how much he wanted them to continue. Their minds were far too gone long ago. Somehow, neither wanted to lose this connection. They could feel their souls embracing each other as they had sex, and it brought them to new heights of mental high. Conan just used her paper to move while Ariai used his fabled chakra strings. In the end, they stopped at the end of the 6th hour as even their chakra gave out. Their bodies completely numb as a slight pleasurable ache ran through their entire beings. Neither regretted taking this step as both knew they desired it greatly for years. Now, they were finally. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you liked it, subscribe to my channel for more fan fictions like this, and goodbye.